A gas station clerk named Priya Chandrasekaran was working the graveyard shift on a Tuesday night in November when two kids, she guessed 9 or 10 years old, walked up to the glass door of her store a little after 1 a.m. and knocked. She almost buzzed them in automatically. It was cold outside, low 30s, and her first instinct, the ordinary human instinct you'd expect from anyone working a job like that, was concern for two kids out alone that late. Her hand was actually on the door release button before something made her stop and actually look at them properly through the glass. They were both dressed normally. A boy and a girl, similar in height, wearing hoodies a little too light for the weather, but nothing that would draw a second glance on its own. The boy spoke first, muffled slightly through the glass, asking if they could come in to use the phone because their mom's car had broken down just up the road. It's a completely reasonable request. It's the kind of request any decent person would want to help with. Priya told me she almost hit that button a second time, purely on instinct, before the girl, standing slightly behind the boy, tilted her head up toward the security camera mounted above the door, not toward Priya, toward the camera specifically, like she somehow knew exactly where it was, and Priya finally got a clear look at her eyes. I'm going to tell you exactly what she saw and exactly what she did in the next 90 seconds, because those 90 seconds are the reason Priya Chandrasekaran is alive to tell this story at all, and because the specific detail that saved her, not fear, not panic, but one very particular thing she happened to notice, is something I think everyone watching this video needs to hear. Especially if you work anywhere that's open late at night with a door two kids could walk up to and knock on. If you're new to this channel, I do these long, detailed first-person accounts told the way the person actually told them to me. Stay to the end. The last part of this story is the one that made Priya quit that job 3 weeks later, and it isn't the part you're expecting.
Priya had worked graveyard shifts at that particular gas station and convenience store for a little over a year by the time this happened. A chain location off a mostly empty highway exit, the kind of place that gets steady but sparse traffic all night from truckers, shift workers, and the occasional lost traveler, but that sits mostly quiet for long stretches between customers, especially on weeknights after midnight. She'd chosen the job specifically for the hours, working her way through an online degree program during the day and needing income that didn't compete with her class schedule. And by her own account, she'd become genuinely comfortable with the solitude of it over that first year, comfortable enough that she'd stopped thinking of the overnight shift as unusual or risky in any particular way, beyond the ordinary common-sense caution anyone working alone at night develops. The store had a standard security setup, cameras covering the interior and the immediate exterior around the entrance, a locked door after a certain hour that required either a key card for regular late-night regulars or a manual buzz-in from the clerk at the counter, and a direct line to a regional security company that could dispatch local police if something ever triggered a serious concern. That Tuesday night had been unremarkable up to that point. A handful of truckers coming through for coffee and fuel, one regular overnight customer who worked at a nearby distribution warehouse and always bought the same 2 energy drinks around midnight, and then a long, quiet stretch with no customers at all from around 1:30 until the 2 kids appeared at the door a little after 1. Priya told me she remembers glancing at the store's exterior camera feed on her monitor behind the counter a few minutes before they arrived, specifically because something about the empty parking lot and the dark highway beyond it had felt, for just a moment, unusually still. Not alarming exactly, just a quiet she noticed rather than one she simply didn't register at all. The kind of small, wordless awareness that she's since come to believe, in hindsight, was some part of her picking up on something before her conscious mind had any actual information to work with. I want to walk through exactly what Priya described seeing and hearing in those first crucial moments, because the specific sequence, what she noticed, in what order, and what ultimately stopped her from buzzing them in, is the entire reason this story doesn't end the way it very easily could have. The two kids approached from the edge of the parking lot, walking together at an ordinary pace, nothing about their gait or movement drawing any particular attention on the exterior camera feed Priya glanced at as they crossed toward the entrance. They stopped directly in front of the glass door, and the boy knocked, 3 measured knocks, not urgent or frantic, which Priya noted afterward as slightly odd only in retrospect, since a child whose parents' car had genuinely broken down on a cold night would more likely knock with some real urgency, not the calm, unhurried rhythm this boy used. She walked to the door, close enough to speak through the glass without immediately buzzing them in, a habit she'd developed over her year working there, not out of any specific paranoia, just ordinary workplace caution about admitting strangers late at night, policy or not. The boy explained in a normal, calm, conversational tone that their mother's car had stalled about a quarter-mile up the road, that her phone had died, and that they'd walked to the station hoping to use a phone to call for help. He gave the explanation smoothly, without hesitation, in a way that Priya told me struck her, even before anything else registered as strange, as slightly too composed for a child his apparent age, dealing with a genuinely stressful, cold, late-night situation. Priya's first instinct, the decent, ordinary human instinct that I think most people watching this would share, was to help. Her hand moved toward the door release button, and she began telling the boy she'd let them in to use the store's phone. It was in that exact moment, as she said this, that the girl, standing slightly behind and to the side of the boy, tilted her head upward toward the security camera mounted directly above the entrance, in a small, deliberate motion that Priya described as feeling less like idle curiosity and more like the girl was checking something specific, confirming the camera's position, its angle, whether it was actively recording. And in that same motion, catching the exterior floodlight at just the right angle for a fraction of a second, Priya got her first clear look at the girl's eyes.
I want to describe this as precisely and carefully as Priya described it to me, because this is the detail at the absolute center of this entire story, the one piece of information that changed everything about how she handled the following several minutes. The girl's eyes, in that brief instant of clear lighting, showed no visible white at all, not dilated pupils reading as unusually large or dark under poor lighting, which Priya was careful to specify she considered and ruled out immediately. A fully, uniformly black iris and pupil together, filling the entire visible eye from lid to lid, with absolutely no distinguishable white sclera anywhere around the edges. She told me her very first reaction was a kind of instant full-body cold that had nothing to do with the temperature outside, a physical response that arrived before her conscious mind had even fully processed what she'd seen, in the way your body sometimes reacts to danger a half second before your brain has caught up with a clear explanation. Her hand, which had been moving toward the door release button, stopped. The boy, apparently noticing her hesitation immediately, repeated his request, still calm, still perfectly composed, but with what Priya described as a very slight, almost imperceptible shift in tone, something she struggled to fully articulate beyond calling it a little less patient, like he'd expected this to go faster. He said, according to Priya's account, something that has stuck with her more than almost any other detail from that entire night. "You have to let us in. We can't come in unless you say it's okay." I want you to sit with that phrasing for a second, because it's a detail that shows up again and again in account after account of this specific phenomenon that I've collected over the years making this channel. Not a threat, not an attempt at forced entry, but an explicit, almost procedural insistence on verbal permission, phrased in a way that implies some kind of rule or limitation the child himself is bound by, one that requires Priya's active spoken consent before anything further can happen. She did not give it. I asked Priya to walk me through exactly what was going through her mind in the roughly 90 seconds that followed, because I think the specific, deliberate choices she made in that window are genuinely instructive, and because she credits those choices without hesitation as the reason she believes she's still here to tell this story at all. She did not scream. She did not immediately flee toward the back office, which she told me was her first instinctive impulse, because some part of her, even in that first wave of fear, recognized that turning her back and running might invite exactly the kind of pursuit she desperately wanted to avoid. Instead, she stepped back from the door, not dramatically, not in a way that would read as an obvious provoked retreat, but a slow, controlled step or two back toward the counter, keeping the kids in her direct line of sight the entire time. She told the boy, in a voice she worked hard to keep level despite her racing heart, that she wasn't able to let anyone in after a certain hour per store policy, but that she'd be happy to call for help on their behalf right now, from where she was standing, if they could just tell her their location. This is the detail I find most remarkable about her account, and the detail that I think matters most for anyone who might find themselves in a similar situation. She did not directly refuse them, did not directly acknowledge that she'd noticed anything wrong with the girl's eyes, did not do anything that might read to whatever she was actually dealing with as an overt confrontation. She offered exactly the kind of ordinary, ostensibly helpful clerk a genuinely well-meaning family might offer any real stranded family, while simultaneously, deliberately, never once moving to physically open that door. The boy's response, according to Priya, was where the encounter shifted from deeply unsettling into something closer to genuine, sustained terror. He repeated his original request a third time in exactly the same words, exactly the same measured cadence, as though her entire explanation about store policy and calling for help hadn't registered at all. "You have to let us in. We can't come in unless you say it's okay." And this time, the girl beside him spoke for the first time in a voice that Priya described as sounding slightly, subtly wrong in a way she struggled to fully articulate, something in the rhythm or the flatness of it that read as almost, but not quite, like an ordinary child's voice. The girl said simply, "Please, it's really cold out here."
What followed, according to Priya, was close to 15 minutes of the two children standing at that glass door, repeating variations of the same requests, the broken-down car, the cold, the need to use a phone, in a loop that never escalated into any overt threat or aggression, but that also never once wavered, never once showed the kind of frustration, boredom, or genuine emotional distress you'd expect from real children in a genuinely difficult situation. She described this stretch of time as the hardest part of the entire encounter to endure psychologically, harder even than the initial shock of seeing the girl's eyes, because the sheer unnatural persistence of it, the same calm, patient, unhurried repetition over and over, with no variation, no genuine emotional escalation, nothing that read as an actual child's authentic reaction to being repeatedly denied help on a cold night, created a specific, sustained wrongness that she found almost more disturbing than a single dramatic, obviously supernatural moment might have been. At one point, roughly 10 minutes in, she quietly, without making any sudden movement that might draw closer attention, reached under the counter for the store's direct line to the regional security company, keeping her voice low and even as she explained the situation to the dispatcher on the other end. Two children at the door, refusing to leave, exhibiting behavior she described carefully as not right, without going into the specific detail about the girl's eyes, uncertain how that detail would be received or whether it would slow down an actual practical emergency response. The dispatcher, to her credit, didn't require Priya to fully justify her fear. Company protocol, apparently, treated any late-night report of persistent, unusual behavior at an entrance as sufficient grounds to dispatch local law enforcement, and a patrol car was, according to the dispatch log Priya later requested and shared with me, en route within about 4 minutes of her call.
It was roughly 2 minutes before that patrol car actually arrived. Priya could see its headlights approaching from a distance down the highway on her exterior camera feed, that the two children, in perfect unison, without any visible verbal or physical cue passed between them, simply turned and walked away from the door, back across the parking lot, in the same unhurried, ordinary pace they'd arrived in, disappearing into the darkness beyond the reach of the exterior floodlights before the patrol car's headlights swept across the lot. I want to describe what happened once the responding officer, a young patrol deputy Priya remembers as being new to the department, arrived and reviewed the situation, because it introduces a detail into this story that I think is genuinely important and that I haven't found consistently in every other account of this phenomenon I've collected, which makes it, I think, worth taking seriously. The deputy reviewed the store's exterior camera footage with Priya, confirming the timeline of the two children's approach, their extended stay at the door, and their eventual departure. He asked routine questions about their appearance, their behavior, anything Priya could recall that might help identify them or determine if an actual missing or endangered child report needed to be filed. Priya told me she hesitated, genuinely unsure how to describe the detail about the girl's eyes to a law enforcement officer, without sounding, in her own words, like someone who needed a psych evaluation rather than a police report. She eventually did mention it, carefully, framing it as something she might have misperceived under poor lighting and understandable stress. The deputy's reaction, she told me, surprised her considerably. He didn't dismiss it, didn't look at her with obvious skepticism the way she'd braced herself for. Instead, he went quiet for a moment, made a brief note in his own notebook rather than the official incident report, and told her, in a lower, more careful voice than he used for the rest of the conversation, that this was not the first report of this specific kind he'd heard of in that general area over the past several years, though he was careful to specify that he had no personal first-hand experience of his own, only second-hand knowledge passed along informally among some of the department's longer-serving officers. He told me there's an informal understanding among some of the older guys on the force that you don't let kids in after dark if something about them feels wrong, no matter how bad you feel about it, no matter how cold it is outside, no matter how much your gut tells you that you're being a paranoid, uncharitable person for hesitating to help a child. He said the department's never had a confirmed case of any actual harm coming to someone who followed that instinct and refused entry. He also told me, and this is the part that stuck with me the most, that they don't have a great track record with the handful of cases over the years where someone didn't. Priya asked him directly what he meant by that, what actually happened in those cases to the people who had let them in. He told her he genuinely didn't know the full details himself, that it wasn't something openly discussed or officially documented in any report he'd had access to, and that the department, as far as he understood it, had made something of a quiet, informal practice of not digging too deeply into it, treating the handful of resulting missing persons or unexplained death cases as exactly that, separate, unconnected incidents, rather than publicly acknowledging any pattern that might connect them.
After that night, Priya told me she found herself unable to simply move on and forget what had happened, the way you might with an ordinary, if unsettling, encounter with two strange or unwell children. She began researching, cautiously at first, and then with increasing intensity over the following weeks, looking for any pattern, any other account that might explain or corroborate what she'd experienced. What she found, and what I've independently corroborated through my own research for this video, across a genuinely wide range of separate, seemingly unconnected sources, is a phenomenon that has been informally reported, described in remarkably consistent terms across dozens of different accounts spanning multiple decades and a wide geographic range, almost always sharing the same core structural elements: one or two children, apparently between roughly 8 and 12 years old, approaching an adult, usually someone alone, usually at night, usually at some kind of threshold, a door, a car window, occasionally a tent flap in more remote encounters, and making some ordinary, sympathetic request for help or entry, while displaying, once closely observed, the same specific, deeply unsettling physical anomaly: eyes that are fully, uniformly black, with no visible white at all. The pattern that struck me most researching this for the video was the consistency of that specific detail about permission. The same insistence, phrased in slightly different words across different accounts, but always carrying the same core structure, that the encountered individual needs to actively, verbally grant entry or assistance before anything further can happen. Account after account describes some version of the same phrase Priya heard: "We can't come in unless you say it's okay," or close variations of it. I don't have a confident explanation for what this specific requirement might mean, and I want to be honest about that rather than offering false certainty. But the consistency of it, across so many otherwise unconnected accounts, from people who, as far as I can tell, have no knowledge of or contact with each other, strikes me as one of the more genuinely puzzling and significant details in this entire body of stories. I want to tell you now about the detail I promised at the very beginning of this video, the reason Priya quit that job 3 weeks after this initial encounter, which is not, as I mentioned, simply lingering fear from that first night alone. 2.5 weeks later, on a Thursday night, working the same overnight shift, Priya was alone in the store again around 2 a.m. when she noticed, on her exterior camera feed, 2 figures approaching the store from the same direction the original 2 children had come from. Her heart rate spiked immediately, she told me, certain this was the same encounter repeating itself. But as the figures got closer, crossing into the range of the exterior floodlights, she realized these were 2 different children. Older, she guessed, closer to their early teens, a boy and a girl again, but not, as far as she could tell, the same 2 individuals from before. They approached the door. They knocked in the same measured, unhurried rhythm, and the boy, once close enough to speak through the glass, made the exact same request, almost word for word: a broken-down car, a need to use a phone, the same calm, composed delivery that had struck her as subtly wrong the first time. This time, she told me, she didn't hesitate at all. She'd already decided in the days following her first encounter exactly how she would handle any similar situation in the future, and she moved through the same script immediately: refusing entry, citing store policy, offering to call for help on their behalf while keeping her distance from the door and her eyes on the exterior camera feed. What made this second encounter different, and what she told me has genuinely never left her since, happened about 5 minutes into the exchange, when the girl, standing slightly behind the boy, exactly as the first girl had, tilted her head upward toward the security camera in that same small, deliberate motion, and this time, in the clearer lighting of that particular night, Priya got a longer, more sustained look at her eyes than she had the first time. They were black, uniformly, completely, exactly as before. But this time, Priya told me, she noticed something she hadn't fully registered in the brief glimpse from the first encounter. The girl was looking directly at her, through the door, through the glass, with an expression that Priya struggled for a long time to fully articulate, before eventually settling on the closest description she could manage. She looked disappointed. Not angry, not threatening, nothing like that. Just disappointed, the way you'd look at something that didn't work out the way you'd hoped it would. Like she already knew somehow that I wasn't going to say yes, and she was disappointed about it anyway. The same tired kind of disappointed you'd feel after trying something you already suspected wouldn't work.
The 2 children left on that second occasion in the same unhurried unison manner as the first pair, walking back into the dark beyond the parking lot's floodlights without any further incident, and Priya once again called it in to the regional security dispatch, though this time no patrol car happened to be close enough to arrive before they'd fully disappeared from camera range. What convinced her finally to leave that job entirely, a decision she made within days of that second encounter, despite the financial inconvenience it caused her mid-degree, wasn't primarily fear of a third, more dangerous encounter, though that fear was certainly present. It was something closer to a specific, unsettling realization she described to me with real difficulty near the end of our final conversation. "It wasn't random," she said. "That's what got to me the most once I really sat with it. Two different sets of kids, weeks apart, coming to the exact same store, making the exact same request in almost the exact same words. That's not coincidence, that's a pattern, a specific location that's been identified somehow as a place worth trying. And once I understood that, I couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't going to stop at 2 visits. I didn't want to find out what a third one looked like, or a fourth, or whatever happens if it ever finds someone working there who says yes." She gave her notice within the week, took a daytime position at a different company that paid somewhat less but let her sleep through the night for the first time in over a year, and has not, as far as she's aware, returned to that gas station even during daylight hours since. I reached out in the course of researching this video to the store's current management using general, non-specific language to ask whether any similar incidents had been reported by other overnight staff since Priya's departure. I received a brief, carefully worded response confirming only that the store had updated its overnight security protocols in the past year and declining to elaborate further on the specific reasons behind that update. In researching this phenomenon more broadly for this video, beyond Priya's own detailed account, I've spoken with or reviewed documented accounts from several other people describing remarkably similar encounters. A rideshare driver who described 2 children flagging down her car late at night on an empty road, asking for a ride, before she noticed the same telltale eyes in her rearview mirror and drove away without stopping. A woman camping alone who described 2 children approaching her tent after dark, asking to be let in because they were lost, using nearly identical phrasing about needing permission before they could enter, and a hotel night auditor who described a single encounter, strikingly similar to Priya's in structure, involving 1 child alone approaching the lobby's locked after-hours entrance. The consistency across these accounts, geographically scattered, involving people with no apparent connection to or knowledge of each other's experiences, is, I think, the single most compelling aspect of this entire phenomenon, more compelling even than any individual detail within any one account. Whatever this actually is, whether you're inclined to believe it's something genuinely supernatural, some kind of shared cultural memory shaping how isolated, frightening late-night encounters get remembered and retold, or something else entirely that I don't have a good framework for, the sheer structural consistency of the core request, "Help me, I need to come in, but I can't unless you say it's okay," across so many unconnected sources is difficult to fully dismiss as simple coincidence or independent invention. I don't have a confident theory about what these children actually are or what happens to the people who do say yes, beyond the vague second-hand implications passed along by that young deputy in Priya's own account. What I can tell you with real confidence is that every single person I've spoken to who refused entry, who held that boundary despite real sustained pressure and real understandable guilt about denying help to what appeared to be genuine children in distress, walked away from that encounter unharmed. I don't know what happens to the people who don't.